When Ethan Cole got home, Clara was still up waiting for him. She looked up from the couch with a soft smile and asked how his day had been. Ethan leaned down and kissed her cheek, and just like that, guilt gripped him hard. Her familiar perfume, the scent of home, now smelled like shame. She turned back to her book, brow furrowed, fully immersed. But Ethan, he couldn't stop staring. For a brief moment, Clara felt like a stranger. And the truth hit him: his selfish desires, even the ones he hadn't acted on yet, were already tearing at the edges of everything they had built. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay beside Clara in silence, eyes wide open, his thoughts split between two women, the one he had vowed to love forever, and the one who made him feel seen again. It all began with small lies. I had to work late. Just one more meeting. Emergency call. But those small lies grew legs, running fast, running far. He told himself it was to protect Clara from unnecessary pain, that he just needed time to figure things out. But deep down he knew, every lie was another crack in the mirror he once saw himself in. His double life was no longer exciting, it was exhausting. He started waking up in cold sweats. His nerves felt like they were buzzing all the time. He could feel Clara watching him more closely, the worry in her eyes growing louder than any question she asked. Still, he didn't stop. Sienna Blake, on the other hand, remained blissfully unaware of the emotional storm Ethan was battling. To her, the dinners, the late-night texts, the secret coffee breaks, they were fun, maybe even innocent. But to Ethan, they were his escape. His lifeline to a version of himself that felt alive, charming, desirable. As their connection grew, so did the danger. Ethan started fearing he might lose both women, Clara, who had stood by him through everything, and Sienna, who now made him feel like he mattered again. He was stuck, trapped between two lives. Each lie a fresh coat of paint on a collapsing wall. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart jumped. What if the wrong person saw the wrong message? What if it all unraveled? Then, it nearly did. One evening, as Ethan got dressed for another so-called work dinner, Clara stopped him at the door. Her voice was soft, not angry. But it shook him. "I've noticed," she said. "The late nights. The way you look at me, or don't. Are you still in love with me, Ethan?" That one question sliced deeper than 1,000 screams. Ethan swallowed. He said he was. That he always would be. But even as he said the words, they felt thin, fragile, like tissue paper soaking up a flood. That night, Clara cried softly beside him. And Ethan laid there, listening, realizing how far gone things already were. He wasn't just breaking their marriage. He was breaking her. Still, the affair didn't stop. The emotional gap between them stretched wider with each passing day. They barely spoke anymore, only exchanging words about groceries, bills, schedules, like roommates who used to be in love. Clara tried to reach for him, suggested therapy, date nights, anything. Ethan always had an excuse. Too tired. Too busy. Too much going on at work. But the truth? He was too deep in the affair to face the fire he had started. And yet, when the house was quiet, and Clara sat beside him in silence, the fear would creep back in. Not fear of being caught, but fear of losing her, slowly, painfully, to the emptiness he had created. Ethan's guilt started to show, not just in his eyes, but on his body. He began to lose weight. His face looked hollow. Dark circles under his eyes told stories that no words could. The kind of guilt he carried didn't let him sleep. It followed him from room to room, into meetings, into conversations. Even Sienna Blake, once the spark in his week, no longer gave him joy. What had felt exciting now came with a heavy price, one that stole peace from every corner of his life. Meanwhile, Clara was changing too. She had become quieter. Her once bright presence now dimmed. Her smiles were rare, and when they came, they looked like they had to fight their way to her lips. The home they'd built together, full of laughter and love, now felt cold, like a memory of what it used to be. Ethan knew he was standing at a crossroads. One way could lead to healing, the other, to complete destruction. But fear paralyzed him. Fear of facing what he'd done. Fear of losing it all. Fear of the truth. Then came the night everything cracked open. He came home late, again. Clara was sitting in the living room, lights off, shadows flickering from the street outside. The air was so still it felt suffocating. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse him. Instead, she asked softly, "Are you in love with someone else?" Her words landed like a stone in a still pond. No noise, but ripple after ripple of pain. Ethan froze. No more lies could save him. This was the moment: confess and risk everything, or continue down a path that was already destroying them both. The silence between them grew heavier by the second. His heart pounded. His mouth was dry. He didn't know how to answer, or if any answer would matter now. But even after this confrontation, Ethan didn't walk away from Sienna. If anything, their affair intensified. They met more often, stayed out later. It stopped feeling playful and started feeling desperate, like they were clinging to something they couldn't name. Something that might collapse at any moment. Ethan told himself it was too late to fix things with Clara. That he'd already broken too much. That maybe he deserved this new life. But deep down, the lies didn't comfort him anymore. Especially not when he saw Clara's eyes, red from crying. Her hands, fidgeting as if they were always searching for something that had been lost. The distance between them wasn't just emotional now. It was visible in every inch of space in their home. They were living like strangers, playing their roles in a silent tragedy, the betrayer and the betrayed, both locked in place. The deeper he fell into Sienna's world, the more tangled his emotions became. The rush he felt with her started to clash violently with the guilt that hit him the moment he stepped back through his front door. And the stress began to unravel him, at home, at work, everywhere. Then came the night he made a reckless mistake. Driven by guilt, defiance, or maybe just exhaustion, Ethan brought Sienna to a social event. His circle of friends. People who knew Clara. People who would know what this meant. It was a disaster. The awkward looks. The hushed whispers. It didn't take long for the truth to start leaking through the cracks. The real blow came when one of Clara's close friends, who had attended the event, called her the next day. The conversation was short, but devastating. For Clara, it wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was humiliation. And worst of all, she didn't hear it from Ethan. She heard it from someone else. She confronted him. This time, there was no soft tone. No quiet plea. Just pain, sharp and raw, cutting through the air like glass. Her words, fierce, trembling, heartbroken, shattered the last walls Ethan had tried to build around his guilt. He stood there, watching her cry, realizing for the first time the full weight of what he had done. The depth of his betrayal stared back at him through her eyes. And he knew. There was no taking this back. The moment that broke everything didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, while Clara was cleaning. She had started organizing the spare bedroom, needing a task to drown out the ache of her slowly crumbling marriage. While digging through an old drawer tucked deep in the back of a cabinet, she found something she hadn't expected. Letters. Dozens of them. Hidden. Folded neatly. All from Sienna Blake. Each word was a dagger. Passionate, intimate, raw, the kind of messages that didn't just confirm what Clara had feared, they proved it. As she read them, Clara felt like she was drowning. Every sentence pushed her further away from the man she thought she knew. The Ethan who used to write her love notes was now making plans and sharing dreams with someone else. It wasn't just an affair. It was another life, one she had never been part of. Every memory she had with Ethan suddenly felt stained. The vows, the family plans, the whispered forevers, now buried under the weight of lies. When Ethan walked through the door that evening, she didn't scream. She didn't throw the letters. She just looked at him, holding the proof in her hands, with eyes full of heartbreak and a silent message he couldn't ignore. I don't want your excuses. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest of Ethan's life. Clara asked him for the truth. Not just about the affair, but everything. Why he drifted. Why their home felt empty. What he wanted now. With no defenses left, Ethan finally confessed. All of it. The affair. His guilt. The fear he had buried for years. The fear of not being enough, of losing her, of fading into a life that felt safe but no longer fulfilling. He had tried to escape those feelings, and in doing so, had betrayed the one person who had always stood beside him. Clara didn't interrupt. She listened, her face unreadable, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't even remember building. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, but final. She told Ethan she needed time, space, that their marriage couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, that the trust between them had been shattered, and she didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. Then she asked him to move out. Not forever, but for now. She needed physical distance to match the emotional chasm that had grown between them. So Ethan packed a bag. As he drove across the city to stay with his brother, the weight of it all finally settled on him like a blanket made of lead. His marriage. His mistakes. The man he had become, and the one he might never be again. The first few nights in the guest room were sleepless. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision that had led him here. The texts. The dinners. The lies. Every scene echoed like regret on a loop. Back at home, Clara used the silence to start her own healing. She reached out to a few trusted friends. And eventually, to a therapist. In those quiet, vulnerable sessions, she began to uncover her own blind spots, not as the reason for Ethan's betrayal, but as someone who had pulled inward when things got hard. Someone who had stayed silent too long, mistaking it for strength. A few weeks later, Clara agreed to meet Ethan at a park in Lincoln Park, one they used to walk through on happier days. The spot was neutral, but filled with memory. They greeted each other politely, but cautiously. It felt like two people meeting for the first time, not a couple who had shared a life. Ethan came ready to beg for another chance. To suggest counseling. To fix what he had broken. But Clara had a different reason for being there. She needed to speak her truth. About the betrayal. The abandonment. The broken future. Her words were steady, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She spoke not just for herself, but for every plan they'd made, every future moment that had been stolen. Ethan listened, unable to do anything else. Every word was a gut punch, but it was the truth he needed to hear. Clara's words stayed with Ethan long after they left the park that day. She had described how hollow she had become. How the woman she once was, full of laughter and warmth, had been replaced by someone lost in a marriage stripped of intimacy and trust. Her honesty was a mirror Ethan couldn't look away from. It forced him to confront the truth. He had traded their happiness for moments of selfish relief. And now, he had to live with the consequences. As they parted, there were no promises. No quick forgiveness. Only pain, and the tiniest sliver of hope that maybe someday healing was possible. In the weeks that followed, Clara turned inward. Not to retreat, but to rebuild. She threw herself into therapy, looking to rediscover who she was, beyond being a wife, beyond being betrayed. She explored her own desires, her voice, her worth. One quiet evening, she signed up for an art class, something she used to love before marriage. Brushstroke by brushstroke, she began to feel whole again. Her happiness no longer depended on Ethan. She was learning how to stand on her own. Meanwhile, Ethan faced his own reckoning. The guilt was a constant shadow, but this time, he didn't try to escape it. He leaned in. Went to therapy. Devoured books on marriage, loyalty, and emotional healing. He journaled, reflected, questioned everything about the man he had become. And then he began writing letters. To Clara. He didn't send them, maybe he never would. But those letters were filled with apologies, memories, and promises. They were his way of speaking to her, even if she never read them. A silent confession of who he had been, and who he hoped to become. But their future remained uncertain. Clara stood at a crossroads. Part of her still cared for Ethan, the version of him before the lies. But the other part? It was building a new life, one where she didn't have to shrink herself just to keep peace. After much thought, she made a decision. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fast. But it was clear. Clara reached out to Ethan one last time. This time, to discuss divorce. It wasn't anger that led her there, it was clarity. She needed to close the chapter, for her own sake. They agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near downtown Chicago, the same one where they had celebrated their first anniversary years ago. The air that day was crisp, the trees dressed in autumn gold. But inside the cafe, everything felt still. Ethan arrived early, heart pounding, clutching the worn-out letters in his coat pocket. When Clara walked in, her face was calm. Her voice was steady. She told him her truth. That she had found herself again. That she had learned she could stand alone. That while she appreciated his efforts, the damage done was too deep. The trust, too broken. She couldn't go back. Ethan listened, his chest heavy, his throat tight. He wanted to beg, to plead, but he didn't. Instead, he looked her in the eyes and told her he was sorry, for everything. And he meant it. As Clara stood to leave, there was no dramatic goodbye. No final plea. Just the quiet acceptance of what was, and what could no longer be. Ethan sat there alone, in the middle of the bustling cafe, the ghost of their love lingering in the air. And as he pulled out the letters one more time, he realized. This was the end of their marriage. But maybe the beginning of his redemption. As Clara walked away from the coffee shop, Ethan stood motionless, watching the door slowly swing shut behind her. There was no dramatic ending, just a silence that said everything. He sat there, torn between grief and gratitude. Grief for the years they could never reclaim, and gratitude for the years of love they had shared. It was a painful goodbye, but one that felt strangely necessary. This wasn't just a breakup. It was the beginning of true penance. In the solitude that followed, Ethan changed. He started taking long walks, sometimes through Millennium Park, sometimes along the lakefront. Every step became a way to reflect on his marriage, the things he did, the words he never said, the man he had become. He knew now that this journey wasn't about winning Clara back. It was about becoming someone worthy again, for himself. Therapy became his lifeline. Each session helped him peel away the layers of regret and poor choices, slowly rebuilding his sense of self. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. But for the first time in years, Ethan was honest, especially with himself. Meanwhile, Clara was discovering strength she didn't know she had. She threw herself into her art, this time, not to escape pain, but to celebrate freedom. Her canvases became bolder, her colors louder. They weren't just paintings, they were declarations of resilience. Her days filled up with gallery nights, yoga sessions, and long coffee dates with friends who helped lift her out of the fog. One day she realized, she was laughing again. Really laughing. The weight of the failed marriage didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. And in that space, hope returned, not for Ethan, but for herself. Both Clara and Ethan, in their separate lives, learned to forgive. Ethan, for the man who betrayed a sacred bond. Clara for the man who had hurt her, but was still human underneath. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't about pretending the pain never happened. It was about acceptance, of themselves and of each other's journeys. They didn't speak often, but when they did, it was respectful, careful, even kind. A new, quiet friendship, rooted in history, not in longing. But Ethan still struggled. Some nights, the silence of their old house was unbearable. He would reach for his phone, heart racing, wanting to hear Clara's voice again. But she never answered. She had blocked him on social media. She wasn't returning calls. And Ethan understood. She had chosen healing. Chosen peace. And maybe the best way he could love her now, was to let her go. In those lonely nights, he turned to journaling. Pouring out the words he couldn't say. Letters he never sent. Conversations that only existed in ink. They weren't written to change her mind, they were written to keep himself grounded. To remember who he had been. And who he was trying to become. Weeks turned into months. Ethan stayed committed to change, not for Clara, but for the man he wanted to see in the mirror. And Clara, she flourished. She found strength in stillness. Joy in new routines. Confidence in a life where she no longer waited for someone to love her back right. She joined a book club, surrounded herself with people who made her feel seen and safe. She took long walks by herself and didn't feel lonely. Solitude had once felt like punishment. Now it felt like freedom. She was no longer surviving. She was becoming. But across town, in a house still haunted by what was lost, Ethan felt every second of her absence. And deep down, he wondered if this was truly the end. Or if fate had one more twist left in their story. Ethan felt Clara's absence in every part of his life. Every unanswered message. Every blocked call. Every moment of silence was like a mirror reflecting his mistakes back at him. He kept trying to reach out, hoping for a reply, even just a word. But there was nothing. It was this silence, deafening and unrelenting, that finally pushed him deeper into therapy. Session after session, he faced the truths he had spent years burying. He began to understand how he had manipulated and hurt Clara, not just through the affair, but through neglect, pride, and silence. These revelations weren't easy. They broke him down, but they also began to rebuild him. And with time, Ethan realized, true atonement meant letting Clara have her peace, even if it meant living with the ache of her absence. It was the most painful lesson, but also the most honest one he had ever learned. It marked a shift in his journey. A quiet but real beginning to genuine change. But just as Ethan was learning how to live without Clara, Clara was facing a new truth of her own. She was pregnant. The test came back positive on a bright, quiet morning. No warning. No plan. Just 2 lines, and 1,000 emotions. Joy. Panic. Fear. Wonder. All at once. The child was Ethan's, conceived in the final days of their unraveling marriage. It felt like life was playing a cruel trick, planting a seed of new beginnings in the ashes of something that had already burned down. Clara paced the room, heart racing, hand trembling over her stomach. Should she tell him? Every scenario played out in her head, none of them easy. In the end, she chose silence. Not out of spite, but self-preservation. She needed space to raise this child, not under guilt, not under pressure, but under peace. As the pregnancy progressed, Clara stood tall in her choice. She threw herself into preparation, not with fear, but with focus. She took prenatal classes, devoured parenting books, and turned the guest room into a soft, hopeful nursery. Every folded blanket, every tiny sock she placed in the drawer was a quiet promise to her unborn child. You will never feel unwanted. You will never feel unloved. Her mother became her anchor, guiding her through doctor appointments, cravings, and moments of doubt with gentle strength and wisdom. Friends rallied around her too, lifting her up on the days when everything felt too heavy. Clara had once feared this path, but now she embraced it. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was creating something beautiful. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan had no idea what was coming. He remained unaware of the life quietly growing inside the woman he still loved. But he kept working, kept reflecting, kept rebuilding. Therapy, career, reflection, it became his rhythm. He stayed committed to change. Not to win Clara back, but to become a man who could stand in the mirror without shame. His friends noticed the difference. His colleagues said he seemed more grounded, less reactive, more real. But deep inside, a quiet ache remained. He had no idea his entire life was about to change again. Then came the night Clara went into labor. It was storming, the kind of storm that shakes windows and rattles memories. Clara clutched the hospital bed, her mother holding her hand. Through sweat and pain, she pushed with every ounce of strength she had. And when Noah entered the world, everything else faded. His first cry was like a bell ringing out across the ruins of the past, calling Clara to attention. She held her son close to her chest and whispered through tears, "You're my beginning." In that moment, she didn't think about the pain, the betrayal, or Ethan. Only Noah. He was everything now. As the weeks went by, Clara fell into the rhythms of new motherhood. Sleepless nights. Endless feedings. Small victories. Big emotions. Noah was wide-eyed and curious, his little giggles breaking through the exhaustion like sunlight. Clara's days were long, but her heart felt full. Every time she looked at him, she knew she had made the right choice. But across town, Ethan had no idea. And the truth was coming for him, whether he was ready or not. The early days of motherhood tested Clara in ways she never imagined. With Noah, every moment mattered. Feeding times, nap routines, diaper changes, and those precious fleeting giggles. The smallest tasks felt meaningful. Her world now rotated around this tiny heartbeat who needed her for everything. She documented everything. Pictures, journal entries, little video clips. She was determined to preserve every detail because time, she knew, was already slipping too fast. Her mother and close friends became her safety net, stepping in on the hard days when Clara felt stretched too thin. Their support gave her the strength to keep showing up, even on the sleepless nights when she felt like she had nothing left. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Cole continued his transformation, completely unaware that he had a son. His days were filled with work and therapy. Cooking, something Clara used to do, had become his personal ritual, a small way of reclaiming peace. He had taken up running too, the pounding of his feet on pavement helping him release years of guilt and regret. The house he once shared with Clara no longer looked the same. It was quieter now, more intentional. A space for reflection, not avoidance. Friends noticed the change. Ethan wasn't the man he used to be. There was a sincerity in his words now. A stillness in his presence. But even as he rebuilt himself, something inside him still felt missing, a hole he couldn't quite name. Then, 3 years after the divorce, fate stepped in. On a rare, chilly afternoon, Ethan decided to visit Grant Park, a place layered in memories, many of them with Clara. He wasn't looking for anything. Just peace. But as he walked the familiar path, he saw her. Clara. Across the grass, beneath the golden trees, she was laughing, truly laughing, as she chased a little boy who looked just like her. Ethan's heart froze. The child's smile. His wild curls. His energy. It hit him like a punch to the chest. That boy was hers. His world spun. Had Clara moved on? Started a new family? Was this child hers with someone else? Or? Ethan watched them from a distance, the weight of old memories crashing into him. He wanted to walk away. He should have. But something pulled him forward. Step by step, he crossed the grass, each footfall heavier than the last. When Clara saw him, her smile vanished. Her entire body shifted, from joy to defense in a single breath. The mood changed instantly. Still, Ethan offered a soft hello. He looked down at the boy and gently said, "Hi there. I'm a friend of your mom's." Noah peeked out from behind Clara, curious but shy. Clara offered a short nod. Her responses were clipped, guarded. She answered Ethan's polite questions, but nothing more. She didn't introduce him to Noah by name. She didn't explain. The air was thick, 1,000 words unspoken between them. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Clara took Noah's hand and walked away without looking back. Ethan stood frozen in the park, watching them disappear. A storm of emotion swirled inside him. Shock, sadness, and something deeper. That child. He could be mine. The resemblance. The timing. The secrecy. It all pointed to one impossible truth.